Hello, everybody, and welcome back. At least to me, it's my first live after my summer vacation in July. I'm super happy to be back and doing another live session together with you guys. Today we're going to look at a topic that I kind of have a little bit of a love and hate relationship with, because it's continuously dawning on me how important positioning and messaging work is when you run particularly a company that is in a very competitive industry. But the really annoying part of it is also that it's very hard to verify, uh, like kind of from leading indicators, whether you made the right choice or not. And oftentimes you end up having endless discussions without no output. So Anthony, I'm hoping that you can kind of make me a little bit smarter and make it everything a little bit more tangible for us as we continue the conversation with you. I've prepped some questions for you, which we'll go into in a minute. But for those who've never heard about you and seen all your great LinkedIn content, like, who are you, and what is kind of the work that you do on a daily basis?
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here. Love talking about positioning. Obviously, it's my passion, you could say, which I never thought it would be, but it's become very, very. It's the theme of our whole business. So me and my co-founder Rob, we started Fletch PMM, PMM short for product marketing, and the two of us, we basically spend all of our time helping early stage companies, usually B2B, usually SaaS, figure out the best way to position their product, and then rather than having that position just stay hidden away in a Google Doc somewhere that never gets referenced again, we say you should try to get that positioning really clearly reflected in your homepage. Once it's in your homepage, then your customers can see it, your employees can see it, your investors can see it, and ideally everyone kind of understands, hey, this is how we're positioning. So we work with these companies to basically figure out the best way on the strategy side, and then help them reorganize their homepages, going all the way to the copywriting of what we would say, hey, this is actually the word you should say in the specific order. So we've gotten to work with now like probably around 225 companies or so. So a lot of learnings along the way, and a lot of consistent problems that people run into, even across industries, right? Because that's, even if you take just B2B SaaS, obviously there's all the different vertical slices of SaaS for retail companies, SaaS for logistics companies, and a lot of the same problems kind of carry over across all of them.
Yeah, and let me just plug for like recommend people to go check out your website afterwards, because there's a super nice before and after section where you have a lot of examples of how did the website homepage look when you started, and how does it look now after you've gone through the work. And it's really good inspiration for anybody like struggling to come up with what is the text that we need to be putting on the front page and not. What is the URL for the website, just for the people listening?
Yep, it's Fletch, Fletch PMM.com. And yeah, right at the top, yeah, it's that little link to the before and after.
Super nice. And like, we have around 50 people watching right now together with us. So everybody who's watching, just please treat this as a conversation that you're a part of, and ask Anthony and me questions, or just comment on whatever we're saying, because that makes it even more fun for us to do. But Anthony, I I put in this the very like let's get the basic right first. That question kind of, how would you explain what positioning is for people who've never heard about the discipline? What like, if you were to explain it to your parents or to your coworkers in engineering who doesn't care anything about this?
Yeah, it's basically like when someone asks you at a party, right? What do you do? Or what does your company do? Or whatever that might be. You're effectively, the way you answer that question is sort of how you're positioning the product or the company or whatever it is. You're ultimately creating a short, bite-sized set of reference points for people to be like, oh, I understand it. Because a lot of times, right, what we actually do is complicated. It's very nuanced. It could be very specific. It could be very long and hard to explain. But if you're going to enable any level of word of mouth, you want kind of a bite-sized way to understand even the most complicated of products. And so that process of choosing all these different reference points and how you relate to them in order to show what you do, help them understand it, see the value of the services or products that you're providing. that whole strategy is what you would call positioning strategy. The goal of it is to try to get a spot in the people's minds where that you can live, that you're like, oh, they're similar to a CRM in these manners, or they're kind of like this, but a little bit different, any of those types of differentiation. And we really see that positioning has three aspects to it. It has the target customer type that you're trying to position for. It has a competitive alternative that they could use instead of you, and then it has your product's differentiation. So those three elements really create the most holistic positioning strategy. But again, those get fleshed out in different ways depending if we're talking about a website or sales deck or content or an ad or whatever it might be.
Oh man, there's already so many questions. Just going back to you said, so there's three elements. Can you just remind us of them? And do you need to have you need to do work on all three of those elements?
Yeah, so really it's like you have a customer, a segment of customers that you're going after. And this does not mean you need 25 different firmographic, slices. It's B2B, it's this revenue. Obviously that stuff helps, but when we're just talking about like the actual marketing element of positioning, it could be as simple as a single market for a dedicated use case, or a single market for a product category, right? Like the market for water bottles, like that could be the broadest slice. It's like the people who are shopping for water bottles could be your market segment. And then these two other elements, really this competitive alternative would be what could they use instead of you? And then you have your differentiation of how you actually stand out for that target market. And so competitive alternative, as I'm not the first one to say this. This was kind of a big insight of whole jobs to be done theory, was that competitive alternative do not have to be other software vendors, right? They could be other activities, they could be other categories altogether. So your alternatives are not necessarily like the people who also raised venture capital and are, getting lots of buzz. They could be the old legacy solutions, or they could just be like manual, put together by duct tape workflows that people have built on their own.
Yeah, in fact, I think like actually when you like most closed lost reasons for B2B companies are people just don't pick up the project. The differentiation was not strong enough against the spreadsheet or the old school phone or whatever the comparison was. And like now let's call out both of us marketers, at least from your communication skills. I could put you into that bucket as well. But this is not just a marketing problem, because when you're in a sales deal and they mention whatever alternative to your solution, being able to like drop those 2, 3, 4, 5 differentiations on a call like this will help you win those deals so much more than if you didn't have these available.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we stand on the shoulder of giants, right? Like people like April Dunford, we're incredibly indebted to the work that she's done. And she's probably like the foremost positioning expert out there. So anyone listening to this, right, check her out. She has amazing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
But really, yeah, like she even talks about more about how the really good salespeople are helping you understand the landscape, and basically they will do positioning for not just their own product, but also the related ones. Like they would say, if someone says, well, should I use you or should I use Salesforce? And it's like the ability of a salesperson to then position Salesforce or the salesperson to position Salesforce to be able to say, well, they're great if you're this type of company, right? We're positioned a little differently. We're for this smaller type of company that probably doesn't need to do in-depth implementation or whatever it is in this fictional, CRM example. Like they're really good. They're really powerful. They're the industry leader. They're great if you have a big complex organization, you need tons of data organized around your customers. We're actually better for smaller companies that just kind of need a lightweight solution. That whole like sales guiding concept, they're doing positioning, and they're competitively positioning the alternatives in different ways, ideally to steer the prospect away. But in a lot of ways, it is helping just people understand the landscape. Where does everybody fit? That whole exercise on the sales side really is a positioning exercise.
Yeah, and then maybe the last loop to that is then, as you've been through getting advice from sales, make sure to loop back to the product department and also check, okay, if we pitch this, are we actually able to back that up with our product when the contract gets signed?
Yeah, exactly. And we have I don't want to divert the conversation too much, but our biggest insight recently, and we've talked about this from a lot of angles over the last couple of years, but the way we're framing it now has really helped unlock this for a lot of people, is that if you think about positioning as primarily choosing these reference points that make it clear, what we have uncovered just from doing this process so many times is there are really two main reference points that help people understand things. One of them is an existing product category that they already know, and the other one is an existing set of activities or workflow, what we would call like a use case that is really familiar. And if you have one of those, if you have both, great. Most startups, they have one or the other that is really clear. Then being able to anchor against these things helps make it really obvious the value that you're providing, and you can have your differentiation. And so quick example on the—
I can do it.
Yeah, can you do it? Let me hear it.
Yeah. Okay. So Dream Data.
Yeah.
You know Google Analytics, and e-commerce companies, they get all the revenue inside of Google Analytics. Well, you can't do that if you're a B2B, and that's what Dream Data does. We put the revenue together with your ads for B2B companies.
So that would, we'd put that in the use case version, right? So we would basically say, trying to do your attribution, like attribute, what revenue is coming from what ads and all that type of stuff. We would basically say, this is a use case based reference point, because everyone understands that process, that workflow of attribution. And then basically you're saying your competitive alternative, right? So the use case becomes, like we talked about those things before, the use case becomes the market segment that you're talking to. It's people who are trying to do attribution of their ads, right? And they're in B2B. The alternative, like you just said, was Google Analytics. And you could say, well, that's kind of broken because you can't really do it very well. We are a new tool for this space that allows you to do this use case better than the alternative. So that's like a perfect example on the side of the use case based positioning, right? On the flip side, if you are the category based positioning, where you've chosen, we're going to play in this existing product category, that's companies like Figma. When Figma launched, they just launched as the hero on their website was the collaborative interaction design tool. And interaction design tools were a widely understood category, and they had added this differentiator that it was collaborative, that you could both be editing the same document at the same time in the cloud rather than having to download everything natively. Or in linear. Linear is a big up and coming issue tracking.
Yeah, we use it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they just put it, I don't know if they still do, but their early messaging when they launched, the positioning was the issue tracking tool you'll like actually enjoy using or love using or something like that. And they were saying within this product category of issue tracking, you have Jira, which is clunky. Everyone hates it. Now we've created a new version of it. So in the same way that it's like you can choose a specific use case, like the Dream Data one, you can also choose a specific category. And in either one, you can have levels of differentiation, and you can have these competitive alternatives of saying, wow, you're better than the other ones.
Great. So Karen put in a really good question, but before we pull that up, I want to just, double click on what you said in the beginning about of positioning as an enabler for word of mouth, because that I think is hugely underestimated by a lot of companies. But when you said that, what did you have in mind, Anthony? And I'm happy to follow up with more questions around it. But why is positioning an enabler for word of mouth?
Yeah. So again, if you say our platform can do these 25 different use cases, we're great for this, we're great for that, we're great for that. What ends up happening is that in the moment of struggle, people will not think of you because there are so many different things that you do, and they won't have that list of 20 memorized the same way that you, the founder, might have the list of 20 memorized. And this is why specialized service providers will often win against generalist agencies. And we see this happen even with us, right? When people are saying, I need to rewrite my homepage, or I need to figure out my positioning on my homepage, anything like that, even though a generalist marketing agency likely could do that same activity and would maybe even do a good job of it and maybe has done it multiple times, they're going to think of us first because we've positioned on it. And so when the thing that you think of, Fletch PMM, you think homepages and positioning, it becomes super easy for in the moment of struggle to be like, oh, you're struggling with your homepage, you should talk to these Fletch guys. That's all they do. Versus, oh, you're struggling with marketing. You should talk to these
Yeah.
marketing people, right? Like it's very vague. And software,
Yeah.
it's the same deal. When your software can cover a multitude of use cases, it's very, very hard to remember. So it's like, that's why choosing either of those buckets, where if you like said, like issue tracking tools can be used 20, 50 different ways, right? But if you put the bucket of issue tracking, anytime someone says, I need a new issue tracking tool. Oh, have you checked out Linear? They're great. They're like a new modern, automatically that positioning has enabled this word of mouth that would have been hard before.
It's so like particularly for companies that are new and doesn't have like a big brand heritage, brand awareness, where customers just come in the door automatically, and you need to break through the noise. You need to settle on just one or two things that you want to have sticking to your company for now, and then you can go HubSpot broad when you're HubSpot.
For sure.
But let's pull up like Karen's question here. It says she's anonymous, but I can see her on the LinkedIn chat. So Karen, this is for you. Do you try to get your clients to be more narrow on their ICP target customer, or how do you advise when the CEOs, execs think that they want to go more broad?
Yeah. So a lot of these things,
it must be a classic question for you.
Yeah, we get this all the time. It's about finding there's a thing that happens. There's two sliding scales. The more narrow you go, the more your messaging will resonate. The broader you go, the less your messaging will resonate. But on the flip side, the more narrow you go, the smaller the market size. All the way down to a single sales conversation, you can customize the positioning and messaging literally one-to-one. That's your best chance of getting someone to buy, is being able to have a one-to-one custom positioning and messaging. That's truly what sales is doing. But it's obviously one person, market of one, right? Like, so that's not going to help you. But if you go really, really broad, what happens is the market size becomes massive, but now the way that you message to this massive group might be really diluted, right? We help people grow their business. It's like, okay, huge TAM of people who are trying to grow their business, but ultimately it's going to be not very interesting if that's what you lead with, is grow your business. You're going to be like, okay,
beautiful.
What So it's about finding the right level where it's like, can you actually win this larger market? Do you have some sort of way of unifying that message or not? And sometimes the market itself, a very tight market, can be huge, right? So like take Calendly. We use them a lot because it's a simple product that's easy to understand. Their TAM is people who are trying to schedule meetings online. That's actually, in all things being equal, that is an incredibly narrow use case, but the amount of people doing that
yeah.
become I don't know. I've heard rumors they're doing 275 million in revenue, or maybe even more, multi-billion-dollar valuation around basically one segment that is narrow in some senses, but it's actually very, very large in the pure numerical. It gets tricky when your segment, like the market you're going after, is actually built up of very different sub-segments that are not so cohesive and unified. You're like, well, this group uses us. They think we're one product category in a different use case. This group thinks we're a different thing. That becomes very, very difficult, where you actually probably do want to do some prioritization, where if you can't find some sort of unifying message that really cuts to the core across these 10, you either should just prioritize one of them if you don't have a massive go-to-market team, or if you do, you just execute a multi-pronged, like basically multiple GTM strategies at the same time, where you would say, we've got these 10 salespeople, these marketers, they're going after X market. We've got these ones that are going after the X market, Y market. Like ChatGPT, having the consumer arm of anyone who can download ChatGPT, then having a completely separate go-to-market motion for developers who are trying to use the API, a completely separate go-to-market motion for the enterprise group that's trying to bring ChatGPT into their companies. Like,
yeah,
you have that amount of resources to do that. $50 billion, then go for it, tackle the whole world all at once.
I think I love that scale. And I think that's it could be an essential for any company to constantly think about where is it that we want to position on this scale. Yeah. And on top of this scale, you also need to figure out, if we make this choice, what does that mean for our product team? Are they able to deliver on the companies that we sign here, or are we putting them up to fail because we've promised too much, or we've do we promise too little so we can over deliver, or how do we balance this? Ooh, all the questions are popping in there. You must be saying some good stuff here, Anthony. I'll just bring them on one by one, and then I can check off my list of questions once we're done. So this is interesting. Jordan is asking, what percentage of clients keep the new messaging after they've repositioned, and also how do you measure the impact of new positioning? I think it's interesting, this thing, if maybe just to set you up a little bit, Anthony, that kind of, is it actually, how much can a company deviate from its past? Kind of, if you were this thing once, how far away from what you are can you go, and will you have to backtrace on what you decide? So let's stay on the repositioning messages first, and then we can take a validation afterwards.
Yeah. So positioning, a lot of the positioning experts, people like April, say from the stage, right? They say, I won't touch early stage companies. They don't have the data. It's going to be kind of a shit show. Everything's changing all the time. I work with primarily post product market fit companies, which we saw there was a big hole in the market for all these early stage companies that were pre-product market fit that still needed to try to figure out how to position, right? And so the time scale is slightly different. If you're post product market fit, you're a large company with lots of products, lots of employees, you might position and then keep that for multiple years. In the early stage, you will change more often, and that's kind of expected. And so a lot of what we try to do is to help people. We try to explain our method, explain our methodology, and make it so that when people work with us, they actually see this is what good looks like, because they're going to have to keep repositioning potentially once a quarter, right? If you're really new, you might want to reevaluate the positioning, and maybe not like wholesale repositioning where you're like from one target market to a completely different one or something like that. But you're going to want to tweak it and revise it and sharpen it probably every quarter. But if you're not a marketer, if you're a technical person who created a really cool product and you're not coming in thinking about that way, what's going to happen is you're going to be so far off that you might be thinking like people just, they're not interested, when in reality, they might just not get it. And you're just not understanding the thing you've built, where really powerful repositioning or, better messaging would actually make it understandable. So I would say a decent amount of percentages of the clients in the early stage will keep it until they have the next big insight, where then they would sharpen it, tweak it, change it. And that could happen in the 3-month mark, the 6-month mark. There is a percentage of people who will not use our recommendations, right? Like we are consultants. And so a lot of times
what happens.
Recommendations, and they will say, yeah, thanks for the suggestions. We're actually going to go a different direction. We say, okay, no harm, no foul. Because a lot of times what we'll discover is it's like there's maybe 2 or 3 different paths. You could go through door number 1, this is going to happen. You could go through door number 2, this is going to happen. And they have to choose. And so sometimes we're like, you should really go down door number 1. They're like, we think we're going to do number 2. It's like, okay, this is your company. We are not like a long-term partner where we go into your company and become part of your team and we're advisors and things like that. We are looking at a snapshot of where you're at today based on everything you know about your product and your market. This is how we would say would make the most sense to position you. So that maybe answers the first question, but
and I would maybe just from my experience is that, like, one, it's a lot better to be aware about the topic so you have it at the back of your mind as you work in all departments in your company. And 2, you don't have to think about it as for the rest of your life. Think about it, okay, now we try this for a quarter or 2 quarters, and if it doesn't work out, we change it to something else, because otherwise it becomes a bit too deterministic. If you think about you lock your arms because you think I have to do the perfect position, but especially in the early stage, you'll find it's like a needle in a haystack finding the perfect position. So come up with the best you can, and then see how it works out. Which probably that's a good way to go to the second part of Jordan's question. So how do you, now it says measure the impact, or we could just say like evaluate the new positioning? I know that's not part of your core offering at Fletch, but what's your thoughts about that one, Anthony?
Yeah. So in terms of evaluating, it's tricky, because depending on how different it is, you may not be able to really evaluate it at a real company-wide level for a while. Because what we often see happen, especially because we are saying We see it as we are going to help you figure out how to position, and then we will document it on the homepage. But to do this well, like let's take an example. If you were pushing a bunch of traffic for a year, let's say you've been running thought leadership ads, you've been running, all sorts of different content where you were positioned in one way. And so you've generated a decent amount of traffic coming to your homepage. And then all of a sudden you say, maybe we don't want to do SMB anymore. We want to do enterprise. So you reposition the company from one segment who you've spent the last year creating content for, and now you go, all right, we're launching a new homepage. Now we're going to be focused on enterprise. What's going to happen to the conversion rate? It's going to plummet because all the SMBs are no longer your target customer are going to say, I don't think I'm their target customer. And they're going to bounce and not convert like they would before. So you could finish that positioning project, and if your hunch was, it totally failed, our conversions plummeted. It's like, you can't look at positioning as narrow as one metric because it impacts so many things. So like in that case, you'd say, all right, well, we think that the strategic bet we're going to make is on enterprise as our primary group. That's probably a 6 to 12 month lag where you actually different messaging, different content, all that stuff will take probably 6 to 12 months before it really starts to shift everything in order to make it so that now 6 to 12 months later, enterprise companies are landing on your website. They understand, they've been convinced over a long period of time, repeatedly seeing your content. All right, now I'm ready to buy with these people. And so then you would be able to evaluate it there. But then the problem is it goes even further because maybe you discover that when those enterprise clients buy, maybe in the year following, they churn or they hate it or they will experience the product or whatever. So it really measures across not everything above the funnel, but then also once they've gone into product adoption, expansion, upsell, all those different aspects beyond to really measure it. It's like multiple years potentially. So there are quick wins that you should be able to see. Like if I get a qualified prospect who's in the new group that I've positioned for, if I deliver the message that we've helped them write in a sales call, maybe not on the homepage, but in a sales call, or they've come prepped and they're like, we're like, wait, this is actually someone from the new customer segment that we're going after. And we basically ask them, like, what do you think we do? Like, how, what brings you here? And they repeat back the position and they're like, this is the problem you talked about on your homepage. That's exactly what we're facing. Like those are early signals. This might be the right bet to make. But ultimately, it is a bet that is going to be proven or disproven over a very long period of time. Like Rob, my co-founder, he's used the example of people are like, let's A/B test our positioning. And he used the example where he was like, it's like you're leaving, San Francisco on a boat, and one positioning is Japan and the other positioning is Alaska. And you're like, all right, let's A/B test the positioning. We're going to swim towards, point our boat to Alaska for a week, and then we're going to point our boat to Japan for the other week. It's like you're not really going to be able to. This isn't something that you can A/B test, right? Like it's such a big strategic decision. It can't really be quantified in such a nice way that we would like it to be.
No, and I think what you're saying there is that it needs to be a company movement as well, because if we in marketing go ahead and do something, we still need the sales team to be listening for us, to be executing on that position as well. And the salespeople should be, I think at least to me, the salespeople would be a very important part of measuring the impact of the new positioning. Are they losing all the deals, or are they certainly feeling that now they differentiate a bit more and the deals are coming a little bit easier? Something I was thinking, Anthony, is that do you see companies also working with like let's call it a positioning roadmap? So instead of doing this small business to enterprise, can you kind of draw up a map that says the next 6 months we're gonna go, instead of to small business, we're gonna do SMB, and then we're gonna do mid-size, and then we go to enterprise, to not make that kind of harsh transition between two positions?
Yeah, I think that the most famous example of this is Jeff Bezos with Amazon, right? He goes on record in, I don't know, maybe the 90s. There's these videos where he looks super dorky. Now he's like jacked. Like videos when he was a dorky nerd. And he's like, I'm going to sell everything you can imagine, right? Like Amazon's going to be the store where you can buy anything you could possibly imagine. But he goes to market as an online bookstore. And he really only expands beyond online books when Amazon becomes the market leader in online books, which all things being equal is a microscopic market compared to the one that they're doing right now. But he knew I want to expand from a position of strength. So he already had those maps of where he was going to broaden the positioning, and really only did it once he had won the one market. Spotify is another example. Spotify only did music until they became the market leader. They had dethroned iTunes. They had become the dominant way that everyone listened to music. They IPO'd, and then they launched podcasts. And then fast forward again, they do podcasts. So their position now has broadened from just music to like audio. And so broader positioning, and they only do podcasts until they become the dominant market leader in podcasts, which they are. They surpassed Apple Podcasts. They're the #1 way that people consume podcasts. Then they expanded again to audiobooks. So we're in that third phase of broadening. And now they really are like, even broader level of listening content, right? Like it wasn't just music and talk radio. Now it's music and talk and, books to be consumed.
Yeah, really good insights. So here's another one I think that's good from Ayushi. What are some of the key indicators that it's time to reposition? Like what should be looking for if you need to start thinking about these positioning things?
Yeah, when we work with clients, we have an intake survey. It's pretty big and long and bulky of who the market is.
Great sell.
Yeah, exactly right. Customer segments that they're going after, things like that. And we always ask them this question. We say, which of these statements best describes the positioning problems you're facing? So there are 5 of them that we usually ask. And any one of these 5, most people have more than one of these 5. If you have multiple, it's probably a good time to reposition. So the first one is, people read our website, but they don't understand what we do. That could be a positioning problem. It's possible it's a messaging problem where it's like, did you write it in really complicated jargon? Are you not really just saying? But often that is an indicator that if people are reading your website and say, I don't understand this, you actually have not really done a good job of positioning the product, because positioning should make it clear. The second one is, people get what we do, but they don't get why they should pick us over the competition. So that's really a subset of positioning problems, which is differentiation, which is like, you have not done a good job mapping out why are you different, right? If Figma just called themselves an interaction design tool without that collaborative angle, they would say, well, why would I get that? I just use Adobe XD or I use Sketch or whatever. They didn't do a good job of differentiation, which we would see as a subset. The third one we would say is, we're going after multiple segments and we don't know who we should prioritize. So when you are, like you said, the product example is so good. We've said this before, but we don't say it enough. The product team will feel this sometimes before anyone else, right? Like the product team will be like, wait a minute, you want me to add these features and these features and these features? Like these don't seem like they fit at all. And it's like, well, this segment wants us to be more of a, this type of product, this segment. And it's like the product teams can get pulled in multiple directions. Marketing feels it pretty fast too, when they're like, all right, you need to go get the retail folks and you need to go get the logistics folks and you need to go get the fintech folks. And they're like, I'm one person. How am I going to run 7 different, marketing strategies for all these different people with different problems? So that's the third one, right? So first one, people read our website, they don't understand what we do. People get what we do, but they don't get why they should pick us over the competition. We're going after multiple segments and don't know who to prioritize. The fourth one is, we need to educate the market on doing things a new way. That's usually a positioning issue, because you should be able to pick a reference point that doesn't require that much education. And a lot of times people are like, I don't want to be in any of the existing buckets. I want to be seen as this amazing thing that's so new, even though they actually are pretty close to some of the existing buckets. And so they're spending all this time educating on the new way, when if they actually just put themselves in a bucket, they could really show how they stand out way faster. And then that last one is really, we have multiple products and are struggling on how to explain the product suite in a simple way. That's also a positioning problem of like trying to figure out how to position the suite of products.
Oh, let's go there, because Dian asked exactly that question. So if a company has a lot of different products, does it need to create different website and craft positioning for each product? So I guess it's this multi-product companies. How do you normally, do you have some of those in your portfolio as well, Anthony?
Yeah, for sure. We'll work with early stage companies. That's probably maybe 60 to 70% of the companies we work with are early stage, but the other 30 are larger companies, sometimes enterprises, publicly traded businesses, unicorns, growth stage, all these other companies that by then they have lots of products. And so at this point, it becomes a decision, right? In our opinion, every product gets its own positioning And there might be multiple positionings per product, because if you have the same product, like let's take Figma, you would position it one way for designers and a different way for developers. Both of them will use Figma, but the positioning will look different. So individual products get their own positioning, and individual segments for each individual product get their own positioning. Once you are doing positioning for multiple products at once, you are no longer doing product positioning. You're now doing brand positioning, which is a different concept. It's more saying, how do we want to position not a product, but the company? And that's where you end up working more with brand agencies. You end up with like larger themes, like, Slack, where work happens, things like that, right? Think different with Apple. Just do it with Nike. You get more of the slogan-y, aspirational, big themes that cover a lot of products. In terms of actual web pages, we actually don't think that you should, even if you have multiple products, the pages themselves should still be oriented for products, because purely of how people interact with websites. So the medium is the message, that whole concept. When people read web pages, they aren't reading for inspiration, right? They're like, I go to the Nike page to be inspired. Like, no, you go to the Nike page to buy products, right? So even if you're doing brand positioning that influences how you show up out in the world, when you're running your Super Bowl ads and stuff, great. But when you get to a website, it is likely that the visitors are looking to buy products or learn about products. So even when you're large, we say product marketing should still own most of the homepage. Like, you could look at Apple. Apple's a perfect example. Apple is not one big ad for the company that's like, here's what we stand for. Everyone, if you're watching this, go to apple.com. It's literally a giant poster for the iPhone right now, and it's doing product marketing square on the homepage, right? Multi-trillion-dollar company. iPhone, our most powerful cameras yet, ultra fast chips, and USB-C. Like, that's product marketing. I'm looking at an iPhone and you're describing features. Like none of that like super aspirational stuff. Scroll down, it's iPad Pro. And so you'll see this, that the smartest companies resist the temptation to be like, the page is for my aspirational brand messages. And they remember that web pages are usually consumed for people who are trying to learn or purchase products.
Yeah. Good point. If we look into the kind of how to get this done, I know you guys have a very, if you go to the Fletch PMM website, there's a very laid out process. But for those who haven't been there and wanna just try themselves, how would you lay out? What should a process be like to go from 0 to 1 or from A to B on like repositioning a homepage?
Yeah. So for us, it comes down to the first big question you want to answer is there a product category that we are willing to put ourselves in? That's really one. Or if no, is there a use case we want to lead with? And so a lot of times it becomes obvious if you just list them. So if you say, what are all the product categories that you could theoretically fall into? And you go out and you list them out. Well, we could be called a CRM, kind of like a CMS, but we're also kind of like a task manager. When that becomes like there's 25 different things that you could fall into, you might actually be wanting to lean into a more use case approach. Where the other way, if you're like, we're basically a spreadsheet replacement, like Airtable, right? We're an advanced spreadsheet. On the use case side, you just list them all out. What activities and workflows would be good use cases for Airtable? That list will be almost infinite, right? CRM, you could build a task manager. You could build you could literally build infinite things with Airtable because it's like a platform. In that case, you probably don't want to do the use case angle. You probably want to pick a category. And that's what they did. And they had two different positionings. If they were talking to technical people, they would call themselves a simplified database. So they were like, we're basically like a simpler SQL database. So they had chosen a reference point that was highly understood and just tweaked it a little. And then when they talked to consumers, because they did B2C and B2B at the same time, when they talked to consumers, they said, we're basically like an advanced spreadsheet or like a spreadsheet plus. And so that way, when people think about spreadsheets, they already have a million use cases. And now they're interested to see, well, I wonder how they handle the use case that I'd be interested in. So really figuring out, do I want to do a category-based positioning argument for my product or a use case-based? That's like step one. And then it's layering on, if it's B2B, is there a specific department that I want to be my champion, or who is just most likely to be my champion? Because all B2B starts with someone, and different departments, even if it's the product spans multiple departments, it is likely one of them will be most likely to champion the product. We'll be so excited about it and so glad that it can solve the problems that they're facing, that they will go and set up meetings with the other stakeholders. They will be the champion to your salespeople to get this deal across the finish line. So it's taking one of those two approaches, layering on a department segmentation anchor, and then potentially layering on an industry-based one, because that's also very powerful. If you are for retail, obviously you want to say that. And so once you get those things in place, it really becomes if I'm doing the category route, what makes me different than the other products in the category, right? Why am I better than the other issue trackers? And Linear had like 3 main areas. They were like, we're collaborative in real time. We have all these robust keyboard shortcuts for everything you'd want to do. They listed them out. They wrote a big giant manifesto. This is what issue tracking software should be like, and we've made it. So they've chosen the market, people shopping for issue tracking with potentially more layers of segmentation, engineers and like early stage, growth stage startups. I think they were mainly going after. They have this competitive alternative over here, which is old school Jira, and then they're listing their product differentiation and then getting all of that and just putting it on the homepage. Like, you'd be so surprised how many homepages mention nothing about a problem, nothing about their differentiation, nothing about who it's for, and they just list all the outcomes, right? Like, grow your business, increase your revenue, supercharge your company, and then the page ends. On the flip side, if you're in that use case route, it really becomes nailing down, why is it so hard to do this use case without our product? How do people do it today? And a lot of times it's going to be like, they're using spreadsheets, they're doing this manually, and you map that out and then actually showing with our product, here's how we help you accomplish a use case. And so like Loom was a really fun use case one. They anchored around the use case of updating your team, and they got really lucky, obviously, because COVID happened, and all of a sudden everything updated their team. Right. Yeah. And so their competitive alternative was meetings. So they said, skip the meeting, send a Loom. They had multiple versions of that, right? And the whole idea was, if you're going to update your team, don't sit in a big, long, boring meeting. Just send a 3-minute video, and you'll get the same thing across. And the cool thing bled into their product, where they have all these stats. You've saved, 25 hours of meetings this month. So they had the positioning, not just in the marketing, not just in the homepage, but then also into the product as well. So like, that's like loosely what you're trying to do, is to map out which one of those two strategies you can do, category-based, use case-based, really figure out what the competitive alternative is, and then why you are better than them in terms of differentiation, and then just literally put it on the page. Just actually see it,
Super good, Anthony. I think a lot of people will take a lot from this. Like, from our own side, something that we've talked a little bit about, we've struggled with, to be honest, is kind of how much do you go for a lot of B2B deals? You have a user of the product that you're selling, but that user then have a buying committee of 5 or 7 other people that he or she needs to convince. A homepage, should that kind of be going for the whole buying committee, or should it just going like narrow on that one persona?
Yeah, great question. And we say the same thing as April, which is, you're trying to find the best champion, and you're going to write it for them. Okay. And so the champion is often not the end user, right? We worked with tons of sales companies, like sales tools. The sales tool space, MarTech's also pretty bad, but sales tool is really, really a very, very saturated market. So we work with a lot of sales tools that are trying to differentiate, stand out. They will often say, like, this tool is great for SDRs. SDRs and BDRs, they are not your buying champion. Even if they're the ones who are going to use it every day, they will the high schooler that you hired for $60,000 a year to make 200 dials a year is not going to be setting up meetings with your CFO and the CEO and the whole buying committee. It is likely going to be someone in the department that is most impacted by the problem, but actually has some amount of seniority to actually make it happen. They can't be so senior that, like, if say your product solves some issue with SDRs, if they're a executive SVP, whatever, of sales, they might they might not have talked to an SDR in years. They're like, well, I'm 10 layers below me.
Yeah.
They're not going to be your champion because they're not going to feel the pain. So it might be a sales director. Maybe it's a VP, but it might be a director. It's going to be someone who has some sway, and it's going to, but still be close enough to the problem that they're like, we need to solve this, and we need software. We think software is going to be the way to do it.
I think that's good advice. So we're just about done. So if any other questions to Anthony, now is the time you type them in. Otherwise, you'll have to DM him afterwards. But Anthony, if we say kind of what are the most impactful things that you said, a lot of really, really good stuff, but what are the 1-2 things that people should really take with them from here if they want to improve their positioning?
Yeah, I think a big one is just don't underestimate how big of a competitive advantage clarity is, because the default messaging right now is incredibly vague and unclear. And just by saying what you do, you will immediately stand out. Even if it feels like, oh, this is going against best practices, you will immediately stand out. And a great example of this is Cognism. I was on a podcast that their old head of product marketing, she left. I think she's at a new company now, but when she was still working there, when I was on the podcast, she told me that they went from an vague, aspirational, like brand, we're cool, increasing your whatever message to a very, very clear one. And she said that when they made the change, they saw their conversions jump 40%. And just for anyone listening, you should go and look at Cognism's website. It is very different than all the other tools in its same category. The H1 is like 4 lines long on my screen. And it says, we give you mobile phone numbers and B2B emails of people you want to do business with. Like, does not roll off the tongue, is not a catchy slogan. And they were like, when we switched to that, conversions went through the roof. So don't forget, even if you sell to enterprise buyers, they are still humans, and humans read websites to learn information. So they are not waiting to be inspired, to be like, wow. They are like, what does this company do? Why are they different? And if you just pretend that you're speaking to a human who's sitting in front of you, even if they're an enterprise human, you need to just answer those questions. And if people understand what you do, they will be more likely to buy it than if you hide it and shroud it in mystery. So that's kind of like our overarching theme for everything that we say is, don't forget, you're talking to a human.
And that's kind of exactly pretty much what I took from you. I looked at 20 of your before and after pages yesterday.
Yeah.
It's almost always here you're saying something very broad that doesn't really mean anything, and now you're saying something specific.
Yeah.
From very broad, fluffy nothing to now you're saying it specifically as it is.
Yep, for sure.
Thank you, Anthony. This has been absolutely great. So if people don't want to do this process all on their own, how do they get in contact with you, and what's the best way to go forward there?
Yeah, check out our website, fletchpmm.com, and it's a great test. Do we practice what we preach? If you read our website, do you understand what we do? Do you understand how we work? We have all the pricings listed. It's all flat rate, everything. So if you can't figure out what we do, then you shouldn't work with us, because we're not very good. But you should be able to read just the homepage of our website and pretty much get all your questions answered. But if you're, and even if you just want to connect and you're not interested in doing the process with us, shoot me a connect request on LinkedIn, and happy to connect with basically everyone. I'm not going to like pitch slap you or anything. That's not really how we operate. So.
Yeah, I can definitely recommend following you on LinkedIn, Anthony. It's really super inspiring to see all your graphs that take something very complicated and make it fairly simple to understand. So do go follow Anthony. Anthony and everybody listening, thank you so much for joining. At least I've learned a ton. I hope you enjoyed it as well, Anthony. And to all of you, have a great day out there.